Hello, my name's Roisin and I'm sick of reading. I'm actually still sick. I'm not sure which of my sick videos is I'm not sure which of the videos in which I'm sick is going up first, so I might get progressively sicker over the course of the video. Over the course of the videos, even though I'm getting progressively better in real life, but we shall see. Today's video is going to be my top 9 books of 2019. I was inspired by the Instagram top 9 photos of the year that everyone was posting at the beginning of the year or the end of last year, and my friend Roz, who is Rosie Verbose on Instagram, posted her top 9 as her top 9 books. So that's why I've chosen to do 9 instead of 10 or 19. Right, so I'm going to start with the one I liked the least, even though it is my top 9, so it's going to be like counting down to my favourite book of last year, basically. Without further ado, let's get into the list. Number 9 on my top 9 books of last year is Saplings by Noel Streatfeild. And I actually have this one. Flash my fanny, okay. Saplings by Noel Streatfeild. Noel Streatfeild is generally more famous for her children's fiction. She wrote Ballet Shoes and lots of other shoe-related books, but this is an adult fiction book set during the Second World War about these parents who are so in love with each other. They have 4 children. 4 children? I think? Yeah, they have 4 children and they are separated by war. Even though the dad doesn't go to war in this, he is working something in town whilst they're in the country. And it's kind of about their life and what happens to them and how everything breaks down. It's kind of not how you expect it to go. There's not a sort of typical World War II story in here. The characters themselves are difficult people. They're not easy to like, most of them, and they're not sort of sparkling dynamic characters. They're difficult and they're very human, but they're not very likeable. What I loved about this book was the atmosphere. There was always something vaguely unsettling going on. It was very tense. The whole book you felt the coming apart of this family and nothing being quite right, and all the time there were these things that you were like, oh please just let that happen so everything's okay, and then it goes in a different direction than you were expecting. And Noel Streatfeild seems to really understand people. She doesn't want everyone to be a hero or do the right thing all the time, and that made it a very interesting read. Number 8 on my list is The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. This is also a heartbreaking novel about people who don't always do the right thing and who you're just hoping they will and then they don't, and a lot of tragedy occurs in this novel. It is about a boy who is adopted, so it's set in Ireland, just after the Second World War it begins, and it's about this boy whose mother gave him up for adoption. It starts with the mother, and she gave him up for adoption because she was unmarried, and at that time in Ireland, an unmarried woman with a child, yeah, you weren't gonna have a very good life or much of a life at all. So she gives up her child for adoption, and he turns out to be gay. So there's a lot going on in the novel about the treatment of women in Ireland, the treatment of gay people in Ireland during the 60s and 70s and 80s. I can't remember how far it gets up to. Quite modern day, I think. And the main character Cyril, it spans his whole life and everything that he does because of his own weaknesses and because of the society in which he lives, and the way that he's treated and the things that happen to him and the people around him, and the way that he makes amends or not for the things that he's done. It's a really beautiful novel, really powerful. I didn't cry, but I know a lot of people do. I think I'm quite hard to make cry with a book, but it's very simply and beautifully written, and even though Cyril does some really stupid things, you really feel for him and understand why he does those things, even whilst you're hoping that he does something different. The next book on my list I also have, that is Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And this is about 3 people in Nigeria in the 1960s who get caught up in the Biafran War. There's Ugwu, I might not be saying that right, who's a houseboy for this professor, and he comes from a small village. Olana, who is this professor's lover and wife, and also Richard, who is a white Englishman who's come over to Nigeria and ends up in a relationship with a Nigerian. And it's about how their lives intersect and everything that happens to Igbo people in Nigeria during the Biafran War and the Biafran independence struggle. One thing that makes this novel 4 stars for me and not 5 stars is that it is a little melodramatic. Like, obviously it is war, there's a lot of serious stuff going on, but there's just a little bit too much melodrama for my personal taste, but that is just me. The book is incredibly beautiful, and it is still my like 7th favourite book of last year. It is incredibly beautifully written. The people are so real. Alana and her husband really felt so real, and Ogwu and his experience, I don't want to spoil anything, but terrible things happened. Terrible things happened in the 1960s in the Biafran War. Famine and child soldiers, and a lot of those things are dealt with in here, but at the same time it's the story of a family. Richard and Alana and her husband, whose name I can't remember, and Ogwu all are a family. It is incredibly powerful, incredibly moving. It's a struggle with history and with the legacies of colonialism and with honesty and truth and the terrible things that people do, the complexities of war, the different reactions that different people have, and the moral ambivalence around a lot of the decisions that are made. Number 6 on my list is The Secret River by Kate Grenville. This is a story set in the early 19th century about a boy. He grew up poor in London and was a ferryman on the river, and in order to make ends meet ends up stealing when his father-in-law dies and getting sent as a convict to Australia with his whole family. His wife basically owns him as an indentured servant until he has paid off his debt, and they move to Australia and they end up taking some land. It's about their interactions with the Aboriginal people and also the other settlers in Australia, and the terrible things that they do and the terrible things that they feel they have to do. The differing attitudes between different settlers, but also the inherent violence of being a settler, even though the main character is someone who had nothing himself. This is another historical novel talking about a very important moment in history and what was done, and about writing that story that is often purposefully forgotten by people who are telling their story of their nation, their story of their state, and the interactions between a colonial state and the people who have been colonised, and how that cannot happen without violence, and this book does not shy away from the violence. It also is incredibly atmospheric. The descriptions of the Australian country are incredible, and the pace of the novel, despite the fact that it is throughout an entire life and that it moves from London to Australia, is so slow that you feel every moment, every inch, every part of the main family's life. Grenville makes you feel the emptiness that they feel from having nothing, and the emptiness of Australia, or the perceived emptiness by the settlers of Australia. Everything is just uneasy and uncomfortable and eerie. It almost has a slight Gothic vibe. I mean, it's in the times of Gothic literature. The eeriness and the lack of understanding between the settlers and the Aboriginal people. The settlers not understanding the Aboriginal people or what they're doing, and feeling this tense suspicion, and there's just this building of tension and discomfort, and it's really incredible. Number 5 on my list of top 9 books from 2019 is White Teeth by Zadie Smith. Now, I know I should have read this a long time ago, seeing as it's a book about London that was incredibly famous about 15 years ago, I think, and I'm from London, although this is a North London story and I'm from South London, so not quite the same. It's a story about these two families, these two men who fought together in the Second World War, one who's a Pakistani Muslim who has moved to the UK, and one who is an Englishman, and it starts in the 70s and moves forward. The Englishman marries this young Jamaican girl who used to be a Jehovah's Witness, whose mother's a Jehovah's Witness. They have a child who is friends with the twins of the Pakistani man's children. Story about race in England, and also about science, and also about friendship, and about who gets forgiven for what they do and who isn't allowed to get away with it, and the consequences of smaller actions, consequences of mercy and friendship and forgiveness, but also the consequences of small acts of aggression, and how these ripple out throughout life until it's all tied up at the end in this insane way. It's really well done, really carefully structured novel. Again, it's a novel that makes you feel empathy for all these different people. They all do really terrible things, and they all have really terrible ideas, like terrible views of other people. The English guy Archie, he's, you know, just sexist and racist. He just is. They all are given their humanity, and their humanity is difficult. It is not, oh, they're all nice people. They're all stupid. Like, I hate all of them, but also love them all at the same time. 4th on my list is Golden Hill by Frances Bufford. Frances Bufford was actually one of the teachers on my master's course at Goldsmiths, but I didn't study under him because I didn't do fiction, I did poetry. I picked up this book because I was actually interested in the time period. It is 18th century New York, when New York is a town of 100,000 people, I think. No, 10,000 people. When New York is a town of 10,000 people, so it's a small town, and this guy comes in on a boat from London with £1,000. The merchants to whom he takes his promissory note don't have £1,000 to give him in pounds, so he has to stay there. And it's the experience of him and all these families. The merchant who he needs to get the money off of has 2 daughters and his interactions with the daughters, and then there's also a man he meets who instantly dislikes him, but they become friends, and there's a bonfire in the middle of New York for some reason, and then him and this man who hates him, they go running across the rooftop. It's like this madcap adventure. He ends up in prison at one point, and it's really fun to read. Like, a lot of the descriptions of food and of events and of people, it's really funny. It's a funny book, and it's a rip-roaring read, but it is also really thoughtful. And the main device of the book is that this man with £1,000, he's the main character of the book. But we don't know where he's got this £1,000, why he's come to New York, or what he's doing. And even though we're in his head most of the time, we don't find that out till right at the end. It's amazing how Spofford manages to keep you hooked on the book and interested in what's going on without revealing anything about this until the right moment, giving hints so that it all makes sense at the end, but not make you feel like you're entirely inside this character's head whilst still managing to withhold this important piece of information. It's a novel about money and race and New York, and it is really fun read. Number 3 on my top 9 books is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. This is a book about art and making art. Some of it's a bit woo-woo, but I found it really engaging. I listened to the audiobook that she reads herself, and her voice is just lovely. It made me feel really inspired and wanting to create art. It made me want to read it again. There's not much more for me to say about this, but if you make anything, if you create anything, I would encourage you to read it or listen to the audiobook. Some bits I can't quite get on hand of, like ideas floating around you, and if you don't use them at the right time, then they're going to go off to someone else. The amount that it inspired me and the amount that I think about it still, even though I read this like right near the beginning of the year, means that this has got the number 3 spot on my list. Number 2 on my list is The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton. Catton by Eleanor Catton. Now, this is a big book. It's a big boy. It's about 800 pages. And each of the characters is one of the zodiac signs. Their personality is designed around the zodiac signs, and other characters are based on celestial objects, celestial bodies, based on celestial bodies, and the effect that astrologers think that they have on the world. And you don't need to know anything about any of that to enjoy the novel. I don't really know much about it, didn't know which ones were supposed to be which, and I still love this novel. It is set in New Zealand, in Rarotonga? Set in New Zealand during the gold rush, and there is a mystery. Someone's gone missing and some money has turned up, and you don't know why. And there are these 12 men at the start of the novel who are in this room trying to do something. We don't know what. They're having a meeting about something, and then this other guy from Scotland just walks in to the room, and they tell him the story. The first half of the novel is them each telling him the story and moving around, and it's just, oh, it's so well done. It's so, despite the mystery being weird, you're just so hooked beneath the surface of everything. And it's, this guy starts telling a story, and then he meets this guy who then takes over the telling of the story, and the way that it's all constructed is so like circular, just going round and round. It's so intense and beautiful and so close to the period. You feel like you're in the period. And what is amazing is there are so many characters. There are like 15 main characters, but they all have such a distinct voice. She's made them sound entirely different, and you just know who's telling the story that you're listening to because of who they are, and they're all unreliable, they're all lying to you, and it's so well constructed, it's so tightly constructed. They all interact with each other in the order that they're supposed to interact, that their star sign is supposed to interact with each other, and the length of the chapters in the books gets shorter, like a moon waxing. Like, it's so clever, and all of this construction, and yet it still manages to be this beautiful story with these incredible characters who you really feel for, and you really root for some of them and you really hate some of them, and it's just so well done. Like, it manages to be a ripping yarn and a clever structural novel at the same time. I'm in awe. Final book on my list, my number 1 book of 2019, is The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower. Oh, this book is so beautiful. Again, I listened to the audiobook, which was read by Juliet Stevenson, and she she loves it. She loves reading this book, or at least it comes across that she loves reading this book. She gets into it. It's a book about a merchant and a courtesan from 18th century London. Their relationships. The courtesan has recently lost her sugar daddy. I don't know the correct 18th century term for sugar daddy, but she's recently died and she is back on the market looking for some work because she can't do anything else, and she loves being a courtesan. She loves it, all of her skills. She knows what she's doing, but she's too much of a romantic. Anyway, and the merchant, the captain of one of his ships, has come back and said he has a mermaid. And so the merchant shows this on display as a curiosity, and that is how the two characters, main characters, come to interact. And then the merchant sends the man off to find another mermaid. And this mermaid, the first mermaid is like a monkey sewn onto a fish or something. That's what it looks like. The second mermaid is something else entirely. The period detail in this book is so good, and it's like period detail, not like just like, oh, are they saying the right words, they're wearing the right clothes, they're doing the right thing. It's period detail like they stink and they shit and they get smallpox, and it's just, well, not smallpox, but you know, they get illnesses and they are really real. Writing is so glittery and beautiful and also so visceral and disgusting, and the characters, I love Angelica so much. I love her. She is vapid and silly and I love her. And The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock have actually managed to become one of my favourite books of all time, and I really recommend you read it. It's a chunky book, but it's definitely worth it. The atmosphere, the psychologies of both the characters, everything, it's just so well done. So those are my top 9 books of 2019. Let me know if you've read any of them, or let me know what your favourite books of 2019 were, so I can have a look, see if I need to get them on my 2020 TBR. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.